When creating an online course, creating engaging activities that are designed specifically with online in mind can have a huge impact on the student experience. Those activities can be the difference between a course that acts like an online repository and a course that's a genuine online learning experience. Instead of trying to tackle the entire course at once, let's start with just one module. Grab a piece of paper and split it into 3 columns. Think about what you typically do in your in-class session during that week. On the far left side of the paper, write down what you would do in class with your students. For example, if I'm teaching Shakespeare, perhaps the students are performing a passage from Hamlet and talking about it in class. Now we want to translate this activity into an online format. You can do this by working backward a bit. Take a moment to think about what you want your students to accomplish or do in the in-class activity. For example, for our Shakespeare class, we want students to hear how Shakespeare sounds out loud. We want them to experience how Shakespeare is performed when they're in the actor's seat. We want them to dissect the meaning behind the passage. We might even take it a step further and have students connect his message with a modern-day application to see how Shakespeare maintains its relevance. Write down what you think students should accomplish or what skills they should gain in the middle column. Now that we know what we want them to do, we can work backward to create some online activities. One of the most common mistakes we see as instructional designers is when someone is trying to cram too much into one single activity for online. Take a moment to think about how we can accomplish the same goals as in our in-class session in smaller bite-sized activities online. Using the same Shakespeare example, we might split this into a few separate activities. Now with an activity like this, you have a really important choice to make. Do I make this a synchronous activity where everyone has to connect at the same time? Or do I make this an asynchronous activity where students can complete it when time permits? When you're making this choice, look at that middle column. Does anything on that list necessitate that students be connected at the same time? If the answer is yes, you can set up meeting times to connect via Zoom. For our Shakespeare example, you might want to set up an established time for students to meet for a digital performance. This allows students to hear how Shakespeare sounds out loud and experience how Shakespeare is performed when they're in the actor's seat. However, we can usually have the opportunity to create asynchronous options for most activities. For online, we typically opt for asynchronous activities as it gives students more flexibility and time to critically think about an assignment, and it gives you, the content creator, more options. Once again, looking at that Shakespeare example, we can use Video Note to capture performances without having them meet in real time. Create a discussion board and have students pick a passage to read from a selection you provide, like Hamlet's famous monologue. Then have students create a video note of their best performance. For the second part of that discussion, get students engaging with one another. Ask them to find a peer that shows the same prompt, or find a professional performance. They can discuss how their performances differed or were the same, and how that performance and delivery altered the message of the passage. The key with discussion boards is to create prompts that are engaging and invite dialogue. So this multi-pronged approach is really ideal. They need to be open-ended to spark some real discussion and involve either critical thinking, creativity, or a sense of discovery. If a student can answer with a sentence they copied and pasted from a book or with a simple "I agree," then you might want to consider how you can open up that prompt a little bit more. The key here is not to provide them with the answer, but to help lead them to discovering the answer themselves, just as you would in class. Now, not every activity has to be a discussion board prompt, a Zoom meeting, or a written paper. We're used to these activities so it can become our default favorite. These are not outlawed, but think about how you can leverage the tools and potential of online to diversify your activities. Going back to our Shakespeare example, again, even with the discussion board, we still have 2 skills we want students to walk away with that we haven't addressed. We want them to be able to dissect the meaning behind the passage and connect the message with modern-day application. This is where we can have some real fun. With online learning, we have a lot of tools at our disposal that don't require additional training for students or for you. Keeping with our Shakespeare example, you might have students create a mock social media post or tweet that translates what Shakespeare was saying into modern day language. Another option might be to have students design a poster or flyer for the piece using a website like canva.com. From infographics to web quests to guided projects, the opportunities are truly endless. Once you've determined what activities you want to use, add them to the last column on your paper. You should see a clear connection from one column to the next on your list. Creating this connection and effectively translating what you do in class will help make your students' online experience just as, if not more so, engaging and amazing as what you do in class.